This is Apropos. There's no excuse for online abuse. That's the message from the United Nations on this, the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women. This year, campaigners are focusing on online platforms and say this form of violence poses a serious and rapidly evolving threat. Here in France, activists are warning that an increasing number of young men are subscribing to narratives that seek to normalise and legitimise hatred of women, as James Fazina reports.
Their ideas are spreading online via social media. While toxic masculinity isn't new, as it came about in the 1980s in North America, it's gaining attention and appealing to some younger men today. Those relaying its ideas say that they're oppressed and are losing out as gender equality progresses. A report by France's High Council for Equality Between Women and Men has warned about the issue in the country.
There is a polarisation happening among some young people. On one side, there are women embracing feminism. On the other, there are men who are adopting harsh sexist ideas, promoted by those who spread toxic masculinity, as well as reactionary and politicised movements.
The report states that 45% of men under the age of 35 believe that it's difficult to be a man in today's society. And that includes a 19% increase among 15 to 24-year-olds over the past 2 years. Meanwhile, 13% of 25 to 34-year-olds believe that being a man is difficult, but being a woman is easy. And these ideas are leading to a change in attitudes. Still among men under the age of 35, 53% think it's important to know how to fight, and 46% believe that it's wrong to show their emotions. The council has advised that an awareness programme be put in place for all young people. It says that it should educate them about respecting others and preventing sexist and sexual violence.
For more, we're joined now by Marielle Barnes, Assistant Professor at the La Follette School of Public Affairs at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Thank you so much for being with us on the programme. You've actually studied the so-called manosphere and its rising influence on politics, particularly in the United States. What exactly is the manosphere, and is it contributing, do you think, to rising rates of violence against women?
Yeah, so the manosphere is a collection of online websites, blogs, and forums that are really united behind this idea that men are subjugated in modern society. They call this the gynocracy, and they blame women, essentially, for that subjugation. And it's been around now for about a decade and a half, and it really started in about 2008. And then has subsequently really taken off once we've seen Web 2.0 come about in terms of like social media, so Twitter, Reddit, Blue Sky, Instagram, those kinds of websites. And it's had an increasing influence on politics, both in the United States, but also elsewhere throughout the world. But it does predate the rise of kind of the far right. But the far right has been very successful in kind of co-opting this toxic masculinity rhetoric and incorporating these men who think they're aggrieved in modern society into their movements.
And what kind of role exactly then has technology played in how this manosphere, as we call it, operates? We saw warnings from the UN earlier, for example. It says technological development has exacerbated some kinds of violence, as well as creating others, such as non-consensual image sharing, doxing, deep fake videos, that type of thing.
Yeah, technology has played a huge role in the rise of the manosphere. So previously, before we had the internet, if you were a man and you held these kinds of views, it would be very hard oftentimes to find other people who would also hold these views. And so the internet's provided this communication channel for other men to find men who think like them, and then it kind of becomes an echo chamber where you're constantly talking to each other and relating stories about how you've been discriminated against and hurt by women. And so like that, you know, increases the legitimacy of your claims in your mind. And then also with the rise of social media, we've really seen kind of this ability for men to connect, and also the ability of the manosphere to draw new men who maybe don't think like this into their web. And so this has really become a problem with kind of social media algorithms. So if you take a clean social media profile and you're a young man, it only takes, I think, about 7 recommendations before you start seeing this kind of toxic masculine content on YouTube or on Twitter. And so maybe you don't believe it initially, but if you watch enough of this, all of a sudden these kinds of ideologies start making sense to you, and then you watch more of it and you seek out more and more content. It also makes it seem like these ideas are mainstream, and that these ideas are accepted within broader society. And so then it becomes easier for you to express those ideas publicly and express them on social media as well.
And another layer we've seen, in the last year or so, particularly artificial intelligence. Is that amplifying the threat here? Are we seeing more examples of this kind of violence directed towards women?
It might be a little early with AI to see what the implications of that are. It is concerning that AI is so obsequious to people and is so agreeable. And so if you talk to it about your concerns as a man, then it will probably most likely agree with you. But we do see that like social media and like these communities are more violent and advocate for violence against women, particularly in the US, like gun violence, mass shootings. Oftentimes, mass shootings that are targeting women are celebrated within these communities. And so it becomes kind of more normalized to commit these acts of violence against women.
And you said a little earlier that the rise of the manosphere and this kind of toxic masculinity, it predates the rise of the alt-right. How do the two play into one another?
Yeah, so in my research, we gathered a whole bunch of websites to do with the manosphere, and really they start peaking around 2012, 2013. And if we look at the rise of kind of, particularly in the US, of the Make America Great Again movement, that starts kind of starting to peak or rise in about 2014. And so what we hypothesized happened is that the Make America Great Again movement actually incorporated misogynistic rhetoric into it to gather these men kind of together, and incorporate them within the movement. The other thing I think this does is that misogyny is very mainstream and very common in today's society, or sexism is at least. And we also hypothesize that misogynistic rhetoric like this has been used as kind of a gateway rhetoric into other hateful ideologies. So white supremacy, anti-Semitism, anti-LGBTQ rhetoric. And so like once you hate women, it's then much easier to hate other groups within society as well. And so incorporating the manosphere into kind of the far right and alt-right rhetoric was very easy, and a very easy way to build a coalition for a lot of these groups.
And the UN says this form of violence, this kind of violence that we're seeing on online platforms, it's increasing partly due to weak technological regulations. So why are regulators so slow to act? Why aren't they being forced to bring in more regulations to monitor this kind of activity online?
I think it's often a lack of understanding about how this technology is going to be used against women. So revenge porn, like no one initially would have conceptualized that when it was happening. And so slowly regulators were responding to that. Nowadays, we're looking at other forms of technological violence against women. So smart home technology is often used against women to control like thermostats and blinds and locks on doors. We're seeing AI being used to create pornographies or deep fakes. And regulators just often don't have the full picture of what the technology is going to be used for. Like they're not thinking necessarily in nefarious ways as many in the manosphere are, and like regulators aren't thinking about how could we hurt women, because they're trying to do their best. And so like that's why they've been a bit slower, I think, to like implement laws and implement regulations to stop this kind of violence against women.
And we hear a lot, about younger men, and we saw some of the statistics in James's report earlier. they're feeling victimized, when it comes to their relation with women. But is this something that is confined only to younger men, or is it just because they're more exposed to the internet and they have more time to spend online?
I don't think it's confined at all to younger men. You often see older men in the manosphere having similar problems in the relationships. You do have some manosphere participants who think that they should not date women at all, actually, because women, in their words, are leeches. And so their strategy is just to avoid them entirely. But dating in general is fraught within the manosphere, and it's oftentimes about taking advantage of women. And that's where you get groups like pickup artists as well, and that their philosophy is to sleep with as many women as possible, and they learn techniques about how to get women and how to have romantic interactions with women. I won't call them relationships because they're not relationships. And so it is a broader range of men than just young men, but oftentimes I think young men are the most prominent and maybe the most loud, and that's why they get the most attention.
And why do you think we're seeing such a big backlash against women, particularly in the US?
I think part of it is a normal cyclical pattern that we see. And so across the 20th century, there's been moral panic about the decline of masculinity and the decline of men's roles at multiple times. So in the 1920s, the 1980s. And so part of it is just this natural pushback against progress for women and gender equality. I think, though, at the same time, certain people have realized that this rhetoric and these ideas and this ideology are motivating, and this is a way to get young men out and voting and participating in the political process. And so if you can motivate people, that's very good for some politicians, right? And so that's also why we see an increase in rhetoric, an increase in young men participating, and an increase in young men participating and voting for the right. Right after the US election, we saw that there were a whole bunch of young men who were chanting, your body, my choice, regards to abortion rights, and seeing that Donald Trump's win was really kind of a triumph against feminism and gender equality. But I think oftentimes this rhetoric is motivating, and so that's why we're seeing it being used.
Mario, we'll have to leave it there for now. Thanks so much for your analysis and for all of that information. That is Marielle Barnes, Assistant Professor at the La Follette School of Public Affairs. Thank you.